Good morning. Welcome to the PTNS Daily Show. Happy Friday morning. I hope your day is off to a great start. My name is Alan. We're here with the PTNS Daily Show presented by the Institute of Clinical Excellence on Fitness Athlete Friday. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Operating Officer for ICE and also a faculty member in our Fitness Athlete Division. This week, we're going to try the front-facing camera. Last week, we talked about handstand push-ups, and about 10 minutes into the stream, it died and I didn't notice. So a little bit lower video quality, but this time, hopefully, I'll be able to realize if the stream dies and not just talk to a blank camera for 20 minutes. So today we're going to be talking about ankle dorsiflexion. We've tackled it on this show a couple times in the past, but we're going to get really deep into why we think people get bound up with ankle dorsiflexion, and we're also going to get a little bit deeper into what the exercise treatment for dorsiflexion limitations looks like. So before we get started, some courses coming your way. Rehab of the Injured Runner, that's going to start September 21st. That's next week. That's with Jason, Megan, and Rachel Selena. That's 8 weeks online, everything you need to know to treat the injured runner. That's going to be the very last cohort of the year. So if you're hoping to get into that course before the end of the year, this next week is your chance. I think there are 2 or 3 spots left, so make sure you jump in there. And then another online course coming your way soon is Primary Care Physical Therapy with Morgan Denny. That will start October 4th. Again, that will be the last cohort of Primary Care Physical Therapy for the year. So if you're hoping to catch that course over the next couple months, October 4th will be your last chance. Some courses coming your way, live courses. Next weekend, Total Spine Thrust will be out in Denver, Colorado with Justin Dunaway. I'll be heading out to watch that course, so if you're going to be in Denver, I'm looking forward to meeting you. We have lumbar spine management that same weekend down in Amarillo, Texas. And then Jeff will be in the Southeast in Orlando, Florida for cervical spine management. That's one of 2 chances you have left to catch Jeff out on the road for a live course before he significantly reduces his teaching and takes some more time out to help run and manage ice. The weekend after that, the weekend of October 2nd and 3rd, will be the last chance, at least this year, to catch Jeff more on the road. He will be teaching cervical spine again out in Bear, Delaware. Lumbar spine management that same weekend with Zach Morgan will be up in Boston. Extremity management with Mark Gallant will be in Greenville, South Carolina. And then Older Adult Live with Dustin Jones and Julie Brower will be out on the West Coast in Mill Creek, Washington. That course has just 1 seat left. So if you're up in the Pacific Northwest, make sure you jump into that course. So that's what's coming your way over the next couple of weeks for courses. Let's talk about ankle dorsiflexion. If you've taken our fitness athlete courses before, you know we hammer on it. It's probably one of the most foundational areas we need to get better at treating and addressing, especially when it pertains to squat motions. It's certainly relevant for other fitness athletes as well, especially runners. But let's step back before we get into the treatment and talk about what do we think is going on with ankle dorsiflexion. Why do people come in and their ankles are just so bound up? I think a couple different reasons. I think not to demonize sitting, but I think we are sitting more than we ever have before. And if we think how many of us are sitting now, maybe not us so much as physical therapists, but if you think of your average person, especially now in the era of working from home, spending a lot of time sitting at a computer desk, right? How are we sitting at a computer desk? Well, we're usually sitting in 90 degrees or more of hip flexion, kind of hunched over that computer. And then down at the ankle, we're really kind of on the same page. We're probably at 90 degrees at the ankle, so 0 degrees of dorsiflexion. And most folks probably have their feet kicked out a little bit, and they're actually probably sitting in some resting plantar flexion. And so we have a lot of hip flexion and plantar flexion kind of resting tone on board. And we know that folks are sitting for a long time now. I myself, even though I'm pretty active in the gym a couple hours a day, I tend to spend a large amount of the day sitting at the computer, some days maybe as much as 10 or 12 hours. And so you think, I spend more time sitting than not. That's more time with my hip flexors and my ankle dorsiflexion getting bound up more than the average person who is walking around and maybe even squatting, lifting, that sort of thing throughout the day. So I think the less time we spend active, squatting, running, moving as part of our daily life, the more time we spend sitting. It makes sense that our plantar flexors are going to get really overused, and our hip flexors are going to get kind of overused. How does that translate to function, to what we see with these athletes in the gym, what we see with our patients in the clinic? Well, they're probably going to have trouble accessing a lot of hip extension and accessing that ankle dorsiflexion. And if you look at other countries, especially third world countries, you see not a lot of sitting. You actually see a lot of people literally grabbing a squat position to rest with. And so accessing that dorsiflexion regularly throughout the day helps keep it from being sort of taken away from us. So I think when a lot of folks ask, why is this happening? Why is this happening? I think that's at least part of the root cause. And then obviously if it's not addressed early on, it just gets worse and worse and worse throughout life, especially when we know people are sedentary and they're not even getting a chance throughout the day to go access that range of motion in the gym. Now I want to switch to the theoretical why to the how as far as it relates to how are we looking at ankle dorsiflexion. I think we need to throw out looking at it in supine. I think that's fine if somebody is post-op and they can't weight bear, but if somebody walks into your clinic, then we should probably be addressing their ankle mobility from a standing weight-bearing position, right? They walked in, they should be assessed in standing. That's how humans operate. We have evolved to resist gravity. You're really not going to get a good picture of what's going on at the ankle if you just assess it on the table in supine. Again, I think a great place to start for somebody that's maybe not weight bearing, but if they walked in, we should be looking at some of the closed chain standing tests. So I've got this wall over here. How we like to do it is if you don't have a measurement, we tend to use your 4 fingers as a place to set up from. That translates to about 4 inches, which is okay if you can't measure it. In the clinic, against our walls in the treatment rooms, we have a line of tape 4 inches away from the wall, and that's what we use to assess ankle dorsiflexion. So I'm going to bring you over here and get a little side angle of the wall. Perfect. So assessing and standing is pretty easy. Again, we're about 4 fingers away from the wall. Trying to get you all a good look at my leg here. There we go. And then standing is quite simple, right? Keep your heel down, drive your knee towards that wall as much as you can. If you can contact the wall, then we know gastroc is doing pretty okay. We know gastroc is active when the knee is straight. And then we need to get into half kneeling. Why? We also need to assess the soleus. So that same measurement now in kneeling, same idea. Keep your heel down, drive that knee to the wall, and you can see I fail that quite horrifically. I'm about 3 inches away from the wall. I'm even worse on my right. So that's how we assess dorsiflexion. We need to assess it in standing and half kneeling and closed chain. Get a good look at what's happening at the gastroc and standing. Most folks aren't going to have too much of a limitation there. What we're really interested in, especially with the squat pattern, is how does half kneeling look in closed chain? And you're going to find a lot of folks have an issue with soleus. Now we also need to assess hip flexion and hip extension range of motion. Why do we need to do that? Well, if the hip is bound up and we're lacking a lot of hip extension, if the hip can't extend the knee and the leg, the ankle is going to do it for you, right? When you're walking, when you're running, when you're going upstairs, if you are missing some hip extension range of motion, maybe hip extensors are also weak, your body is not going to let you fall downstairs. Your body is not going to let you fall forward when you take a step. It's going to activate your calf muscles, especially your gastroc and soleus, to extend that knee so that you can continue to walk, run, go up and down the stairs, that sort of thing. What does that mean? That means the calf is going to get overloaded, and we kind of can see how this can fuel even more limitations in ankle dorsiflexion if we're always using our calf to extend our leg and not our hip. So we do need to assess hip flexion range of motion as well. We're all pretty familiar with this one. Most of us learned this in school. That if we have a table, we can do a quick Thomas test here. Hold one knee, lift the other leg down, and ideally our leg is going to be flat on the table. And you can see I am missing quite a bit of range of motion there because, again, I sit a lot, missing some hip extension range of motion because my hip flexors are tight. And so I am that person that we just talked about that is probably overusing their calves to extend their leg. So assessing hip flexion range of motion and hip extension range of motion is really important as well. If we don't address what's going on with the hip, the calf is always going to be chronically overloaded. And no matter what we do to calm down calf symptoms, people who come in and feel like their calf has blown up on maybe a run or maybe a CrossFit workout with box jumps and double unders, anything really calf heavy, we are just kind of pushing the issue downstream by only addressing the ankle, foot, and calf if we're not also doing something to address tight hip flexors and open up that hip extension range of motion. The benefit there, aside from discontinuing the overloading of the calves and opening up the hip, is that by opening up more hip extension, we can create more powerful triple extension, which translates really nicely to running, to jumping, to Olympic weightlifting, and to a lot of the stuff that folks are doing in the fitness athlete community. So we have a double benefit there of addressing those tight hip flexors. So that's how to look at it. That's why we think it's going on. Now, what about treatment? Really important. Load is probably the most important treatment that you can do here. I think if you can get some needles into somebody's calf or hip flexor, and you open up a lot of range of motion, that's great. That's something you want to continue to use in your plan of care. But what I found is that almost never works. That people who come in who have had chronically tight calves and or hips, that manual therapy might create a small change, but it's highly unlikely, and it definitely doesn't get a lot of change between sessions. So by all means, if you see a big change, if you assess, if you do that treatment and you get a big change with your retest, by all means, continue to ride that horse till it bucks you. But if you sit that person back up, you take them back over to the wall for that closed chain soleus test, and their motion did not change at all, you should not expect that continuing to needle that person or cup their calves or whatever every time they come in is going to miraculously change their ankle mobility. We need to leave that treatment behind, and we need to go to what I found to be successful, which is really heavy loading of these ranges of motion. So I'm going to show you a couple of different things for the calf and then something for the hip as well. So I'm a big fan, and I'm becoming an even bigger fan of some slant board Jefferson curls to work the gastroc. So I've got that set up over here. This is just a standard slant board that you can get from any physical therapy supply company. I like to start low and then build it up as people are able, and then using a kettlebell to do Jefferson curl. Yes, we're going to get some neuromobility here in the back and some hamstring lengthening, but why we're doing this is really to get some top-down eccentric motion into the gastroc. So fairly straightforward. Pick up that kettlebell, stand on the slant board, bias those ankles into dorsiflexion, and just go as low as you can, and then just add in that eccentric tempo here. Some long, slow time under tension to really open up that gastroc range of motion. Doing a couple sets of maybe 4 to 8 reps here with the heavy load. And I like to use a lot of tempo here. 3, 5, maybe even 8 or 10 seconds time under tension. Yes, big hamstring stretch. Yes, lower back stretch, but we're after it for the gastroc. What's nice is this is a really easy test retest. Check gastroc at the wall, hit some slant board Jefferson curls, and then retest that gastroc standing test. You'll see that a lot of folks' gastroc mobility limitation is really just kind of neuromotor, and then it will clear up very quickly with this treatment, which is great. Really awesome for runners. Runners are worried more so about gastroc mobility than soleus. So that's a really good treatment there. The other thing I have right here is just a 45-pound plate. And one of the treatments I like to use for gastroc is just a single leg deficit, little hand touch assist going up, and then controlling that range of motion and trying to get that heel below the level of the toes, and even spending some time in the tempo in that bottom position. What's nice is I can pick up a kettlebell and I can very quickly add some load to that eccentric. Again, really good for gastroc range of motion. What's nice about that is that deficit is really the key. Being able to get your heel below your toes is really crucial. Oftentimes in the clinic we do this flat, which is really missing that last little bit of range of motion of the tendon. Most folks can keep their heel on the ground standing or walking, and so just working the range of motion that they already have isn't very helpful. So adding in the deficit with a 45-pound plate, getting a 3 to 5 inch deficit, lets them access that range of motion that they currently do not have access to, which is the whole point of doing all this. So that's how we address gastroc when we're addressing standing calf mobility. Now, what about seated mobility? The first thing I'm going to show you is just a seated deficit calf raise. So, same idea. We've got that 45-pound plate for a deficit. We've got our foot kicked out in front of us a little bit. We can come up in our calf raise and then control the negative down, trying to get our heel below our toes. We're already in the right position to then add some load to it, and we can do some seated calf raises here, really emphasizing a big tempo and some heavy load. This is okay in the clinic or in the gym. What I don't like about it is the angle is kind of weird. You're leaned back and you're kind of in a squat. You don't have a lot of leverage to get a lot of heavy weight on your knee and lift it. The goal with eccentrics is to try and induce muscular failure, and you're just not going to be able to go heavy enough with a weight on the knee to do that, which is why I love what I'm going to show you next, which is our good old-fashioned seated calf raise machine. Now, we see these in Globo gyms. We don't really see them in PT clinics, and we definitely don't see them in CrossFit gyms, but I think this is a really important piece of equipment to have if you're actually trying to move the needle on ankle dorsiflexion, especially as it pertains to that soleus motion when we're trying to help people out with squat depth. This puts the knee, the ankle, the foot in a much better mechanical position to do negatives, and not only that, but do really heavy negatives, because the benefit here is we've all probably used one of these machines, is we're already pre-positioned in dorsiflexion on the foot pads, which is a little bit better than using the plate. We also have the advantage of the handle and the pads here that we can now use momentum to really generate a lot of weight and momentum to have a lot of heavy weight on the machine and try our best to control through on those negatives so we can move a lot more weight and we can get closer to mechanical tissue failure than we can with just the box and the plate by using a seated calf raise machine. A lot of folks misunderstand eccentrics for the use of improving mobility. When you look at the research, they are usually using machines like a Biodex or something to help assist with the concentric phase of the lift. And then the whole idea of the eccentric lengthening is that you're trying your best to produce muscular tension against a weight that you would not be able to lift concentrically, and you're trying to control it as much as possible as basically the weight forces the muscle through a new length, the joint through a new range of motion that you would not be able to get to if you could control the movement concentrically and eccentrically. Oftentimes we see eccentrics dosed out wrong. We have folks doing sets of like 5 sets of 20 with an eccentric. Using really light weight eccentrically is good for building strength. It can be good for building tendon health, but when we're actually trying to change range of motion, lengthen tendon, lengthen muscle tissue, we need to be able to go really heavy, and the seated calf raise machine is a really nice piece of equipment because we can almost, you can think of it of like kipping the weight up and then trying our best to control the negative. That's really going to force the muscles of the soleus towards mechanical failure, which is the idea. That's the whole point of trying to use eccentrics to improve range of motion. We just can't get that with the seated calf raise on a box and a plate. We can get that with the seated calf raise machine. Now, these are not as expensive as you might think. This one is from Titan Fitness. I think it's like $140, right? So like one Blue Cross patient, right? To be able to buy that machine. So it's really not that expensive. With no weight on it, it's super lightweight. It weighs like maybe 5 pounds. You can just post it up against a wall and then pull it down when you need to use it. So I highly recommend, if you are working at all with a fitness athlete and you're trying to adjust ankle range of motion, that you pick up yourselves one of these seated calf raise machines. So that's how to address standing gastroc lengthening and seated soleus lengthening. What about the hip flexor? We're gonna go back to that treatment table. And arguably, one of the worst exercises ever created is a hip flexor lengthening in supine with a kettlebell over your toes. Looks like this. So now I'm going to lift both legs up, and the leg that's working, just going to try to do some negatives and really letting that weight pull me all the way down below the level of the table. Again, if we're truly trying to do some eccentric lengthening, this would be so heavy that I could not lift it up concentrically. Maybe I would have to hand it off to a patient to be able to get it back up and have them control the negative all the way down below the level of the table. Once you start to get into that deep range of motion, opening up those hip flexors into hip extension, you might hear some nice clicks and pops and really open up that hip flexion range of motion. Now, you need to be able to lift at least 10 to 15 pounds there to be able to hook the kettlebell around your foot. There is a really nice device now called the monkey foot, the monkey claw. We have one at the clinic. It's very nice. I'll post a link to it in the comments later on. It basically looks like a snowboard binding that has a claw on the bottom, and you can put lighter dumbbells underneath of it, and then it binds around the patient's foot so that if they can't even lift 10 or 15 pounds with a kettlebell over their toe, that way we can still get some lighter load in there and work on that hip flexor eccentric strength. And again, trying to open up that range of motion to improve hip extension. The last thing I'm going to show you all is just some ways to strengthen soleus and gastroc that I find to be helpful for the fitness athlete. Fairly straightforward. Just some variations of a farmer's carry. Holding a kettlebell or two. We can do two variations, both on our tiptoes to work gastroc. We're just walking as high on our toes as we can. For soleus, call this the ninja walk, right? We're trying to be bent knee, but also up on our toes. So knees are bent, we're biasing soleus, but I'm still up on my toes as I'm doing that little soleus creep walk. What's nice is you can also work in some balance for your older adults here by taking either of those variations and just turning it into a tiptoe with straight or bent knees and turn it into a tandem stance walk. So now we're working gastroc, now we're working soleus, we're working grip strength, and we're working balance. Really nice exercise for anybody, but especially older adults, to work that plantar flexion strength in the mid-range for soleus and gastroc. So reinforcing with strengthening, that's what I like to go to. You'll often find folks with bound up ankle range of motion. You would think they have super strong calves because their plantar flexors are usually overdeveloped. They usually have big calves, but it's actually opposite that. They're usually quite weak because they're not accessing the full range of motion of the joint and the muscle all the time. So a couple different ways of why we think ankles get bound up, different ways to assess ankle dorsiflexion, standing, half kneeling to bias gastroc versus soleus, how to address hip flexion and look at why are the hip flexors, if they are contributing to limited hip extension. We know that with overloaded calves comes chronic tightness and often some symptoms, feelings of muscle tenderness or otherwise discomfort in the calves when we use the calves during exercise. And then a couple different ways to assess those range of motion limitations. Standing deficit calf raises on a plate with a kettlebell. Seated deficit calf raises with a kettlebell on a plate in a box in the gym or clinic, or ideally with a seated calf raise machine. Some slant board Jefferson curls with a kettlebell. Hip flexor negatives with a kettlebell, and then some standing work with farmer's carries for soleus and gastroc strengthening. The last thing I'll just add is what's nice about the slant board is you can reinforce that range of motion with some slant board squats. So just giving somebody a kettlebell and asking them to slowly control that range of motion as they sink into that squat. Even a person with super tight ankles like me can get into a really nice deep squat position here. Really nice for opening up not only the ankles, but it will also open up the hips, especially hip internal rotation there. And if somebody is bound up in hip flexion, slant board squats will help as well. The downside is these typical slant boards that we have in the physical therapy clinic are very narrow. You need really good hip mobility on these to get a comfortable squat. I highly recommend you look at Slant Board Guy for a custom slant board. We have a couple of those in the clinic. They're about 3 times wider than these standard slant boards. They're really nice to get people back squatting on, front squatting on, goblet squatting on. They're nice and wide. They can accommodate for taller athletes who have really long legs, and also folks who just don't have that hip mobility to be able to show you a good squat on such a narrow stance. So slant board squats are great to reinforce all the motion you just got with all the other stuff we talked about and put it all together in that squat pattern, which for most folks is why we're doing this anyways. So I hope that helps. That's kind of how we tackle ankle dorsiflexion from the ice, the Health HQ side of things. Would love to hear what you all are doing. Otherwise, if you're going to be in Denver next week, I'll see you there. If you're going to be down in Texas this weekend with Mitch, I hope you have a great weekend for Fitness Athlete Live. I'll catch you all next time. Have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.